Okay, let's start with Chris. Chris, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Amazon?
Hey everyone, thanks for coming to Chain React. This is my first year. I'm super excited to be here. I'm Chris. I lead developer evangelism for Amazon, so that's apps, games, and now Alexa. I've been here for about 2 years. Previously, I led developer relations at Stripe, where I helped launch the React Native SDK. And my job is to try to make it as easy as possible to bring React Native, Android, and Alexa skills to Amazon devices. Yeah.
Thanks. Eli, you're up.
I'm Eli. I have worked on, I'm on the React team at Meta. I've been working on React Native at Meta for 7 years now. Yeah. Someone was recently saying React Native's been around for 9 years. It's surprising that it's been that long and that I've been there that long. I've worked on a bunch of different stuff, but anything React Native related, I have some little bit of knowledge, and then I defer to everybody else for the real details.
Chiara.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chiara. You might remember me from yesterday's talk. I'm a software engineer at Microsoft, and I work on the React Native for Windows team. And I've been on that team for about 4 years, and I specialize in our releases, our testing, accessibility, and stuff with the new architecture. And I joined this team straight out of college, so working on React Native is all I've ever known, in the professional setting at least.
All right, Keith.
Yeah, I'm Keith. I'm the developer success manager at Expo. So that's all about helping developers who are using Expo to be successful, whether that's support, education, which includes showing up at the conferences here and doing workshops and stuff like that. Working within our community. Before Expo, I've been developing with React Native, working on apps since about 2017. So I started as a user of Expo and kind of got into helping other people who are using Expo.
Awesome. Give them a round of applause. So when we were kind of discussing the types of things that we wanted to talk about, the questions that we had, a common theme actually came up, even though I was talking to them individually. And you'll probably spot it as we go through this process. And so I really want to start with you, Chris, because Amazon showed up to one of the early Chain Reacts, I don't remember which one, with like 30 engineers, kind of out of the blue. And we're like, what's Amazon doing, is there React Native there? And it's been really interesting to see Amazon's kind of progression as time has gone on. So can you tell me, what does Amazon use React Native for?
For sure. So similar. We were working with Eli to update the showcase for React Native's the docs for the website. And the question was how many different projects at Amazon use React Native? So I started first going through our code repos, and then I started talking to some different teams and realized independently all these different consumer product lines across the company have been using React Native for years. So first off, you obviously have the shopping app. There's aspects of the shopping app that are native, and there's many, many views inside the shopping app that are fully React Native. Then we saw some interesting use cases, for sure, Amazon Music, Amazon Photos, those experiences across iOS and Android, those are React Native. But then you start walking into some of the wild uses of React Native. So Kindle, if you use Kindle, how many has the e-ink device? Yeah, so that's an implementation of React Native straight on top of C. And so, I think the more that I dug in, my mind was blown of here we are thinking, oh, we're really, in App Store and devices, we're starting to, ramp up into React Native because of demand. And you're like, no, this has been since 2017, 2016. It's been used throughout all these different groups, and we just weren't all talking. So it's been pretty fun to have, we have this React Native interest group internally, 600 plus engineers all trying to share modules, projects we're working on. It's pretty wild. There's a lot more projects than just the ones I mentioned, but yeah, a lot, yeah.
Sounds like
overwhelming.
600 plus, yeah. You said Kindle? The
Kindle e-ink device is an implementation of React Native straight on top of C. It's insane.
That is wild.
It's the coolest geek hardware thing I could ever.
Please have them come give a talk at Chain React in the future. That is amazing.
Drop some knowledge,
I love
seriously.
it. So I want to ask you, Chiara. so Microsoft has been investing in React Native very publicly for a long time now. And I kind of want to ask a similar question. Like, where are sort of the visible places that you can encounter React Native within Microsoft products?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know in the talk earlier today, we had Shivan and Nikolai, and they were talking about Office's usage of React Native. And so that was really one of the original ways that we saw Microsoft incorporating the React Native platform into our products. And so there's lots of features lit up in there, like the Copilot stuff or the Show Changes bar within Excel. And you can list other examples. So that's definitely a really key offering because they have an interest in cross-platform support. What was also interesting as we kind of continued to work in the React Native for Windows space is that we had internal teams reach out who only have an interest in Windows support. They aren't a cross-platform product. And so we've now seen examples within like the Windows OS itself, such as like the start menus, like recommended section is one example of a team who just was really interested in the developer experience of React Native and being able to use JavaScript. And so we've seen kind of a wide variety at the company, some cross-platform, some Windows only.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more interesting things about React Native, and I've seen this at more than just like Microsoft, where React Native isn't just chosen for its cross-platform features, which obviously is kind of like the killer feature, but it's increasingly being chosen for its DX, for its developer experience. And I want to ask you, Eli, about this as well, because Meta has more than just React Native developers on the mobile side. Like they have a large number of people who never touch React Native, however, like native developers. However, when Meta goes to create a new mobile app, do you always reach for React Native, or is it sort of a per division, like is it kind of that way?
Meta does not have a top-down, like, this is the tech stack everybody has to use.
Right.
And so every tech stack has to kind of win on its own for every community group within the company. And so there are some apps that are, they've existed forever. They have, hundreds, if not thousands of engineers that are, like, very good iOS and Android engineers, and they don't have any React Native experience in their orgs. And so when they need to start up a new app, like, it doesn't make sense for them to really choose React Native because that's not who their current existing employee base is. And then there's other apps that need to experiment, and they are a new org, or they're coming from an org that's already been using React or React Native, and then obviously those are much more likely to choose React Native.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Keith, I have a question for you as well. And really, it comes down to like the collaboration that you have with these other three companies here, because Expo, Expo is, for us, Expo has become the framework, which we'll talk about the framework a little bit later. But the framework, the React Native framework that we recommend people start new apps with, and however, that requires certainly a close relationship with Meta. And then also some discussion with Amazon and Microsoft and many others as well. So can you talk about like the collaboration that you have with the other players in the space?
Yeah, there's constant regular meetings. It's a regular interaction. Obviously, we have like contributor meetups where everybody's getting together to talk about the state of the ecosystem. We have regular check-ins. People contributing all across our repos. Yeah, it really takes a village to raise an ecosystem. I think it really speaks to, people have talked a lot this year, like when you compare to other ecosystems, like how healthy React Native's like cross collaboration of all these different groups. There's no one player. I think that's super exciting because I don't know, it tells you that it's not going to fall down. Like just because one person maybe is a little more involved or a little less involved, it's a real confidence builder. And it inspires me. It makes me feel like I'm a developer and I've made apps, and I wouldn't recommend people, working in an ecosystem where it's not really healthy and really sustainable. And I see all this evidence of sustainability because of the great collaboration and constant back and forth we have.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, go ahead, Eli.
One of the things I find really exciting about, even just the companies that are up on this panel is, beyond just being, more than one company at the helm here, is that we all really need to focus on different areas. And those areas are all things that matter to all of you, but maybe don't all matter to each of our companies themselves in the same way. For example, the developer experience for new apps using CocoaPods and Gradle is not a big thing for Meta, where like everything is built with Buck. And so, Expo and a lot of the other companies and folks like CallStack and Software Mansion are able to work together to make that experience, that developer experience, really good. Amazon needs to figure out how does TVs work and what is the navigation paradigm on TVs, and that is not a thing that we have to do for at Meta. And then on desktop, it's like keyboard navigation, and there's all sorts of these different considerations. But every company that is collaborating together, figuring out how to make this stuff work, is improving React and React Native for everyone. And that is really the strength here to me.
Yeah, because there's something about the React Native core, and really it goes back to React, where React brought, I don't know if it was even necessarily the initial focus of React, but the fact that it was like one-way data flow and UI as a function of state tends to work well for lots of different platforms. And so people see the value and they want to bring that there, and there's a lot of other benefits that come with that. Chris, speaking of TV, so when I think of TV, because I'm not very creative about this sort of thing, I'm thinking YouTube, I'm thinking Netflix, I'm thinking ESPN. It's all like streaming video, right? What else is there that people might want to be building for TV apps for?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So I was just pulling up the stat before this meeting, right? So before this panel. So I think last year there's been over 100 billion hours streamed last year alone from folks on Fire TVs. And when you look at how much things have accelerated since post-COVID, education, higher ed, fitness is a huge one. Fitness at home. And so what we've noticed is many companies, once they hit to a certain level that they become a brand, that they kind of go beyond their original startup, most often they're going to have media, or they're going to have education or a health, and usually it's multimodal. They're using it, the customers are using it with their phone, they're casting it to the device. And so, yeah, I think that use case, especially around higher ed, all the way down to Masterclass, to Peloton, to all those different aspects has been, and then also faith-based groups is another area, like sermons, church stuff, type stuff, has been use cases that we didn't, are really springing up. And that has really driven a lot of React Native demand. These folks are mobile native folks that have been told, figure out how to build a TV app. And React Native has just been an excellent solution, yeah.
Yeah. And when you're talking, Chris, about a TV app, UI, like Eli mentioned, you've been by you I mean Amazon, but
I will deliver same-day delivery to your...
Same-day delivery, yeah, perfect.
My friends troll me. They're like, "Where's my package, Chris?" I'm like, "It's coming, man.
Yeah.
I'm coming down the street."
Exactly. I'm sure you know the guy that's in charge of that, yeah. But Amazon has had to figure this out, and it's been a process. If you're speaking to the developers out there watching this, and they're maybe more used to iOS, they're used to Android, maybe obviously web potentially. Yeah. There are differences between those platforms. But what are some of the examples of things that are just kind of maybe slightly surprising about building UIs for TVs?
Totally. So I think first off is a lot of devs coming from the mobile world take for granted the phones in your pocket are $1,000 plus phones, or you're building for desktop. These are amazing processors. Fire sticks are $24. These are things that you cannot not think about optimizing your app. And so I think, and you're thinking about this device, this tiny stick is streaming 4K, real-time, massively intense media files, especially on premiere nights, think Game of Thrones, any of that. It's super intense. How you do that while also it not overheating and melting. And so a lot of the things that I think a lot of devs will come in and have assumptions of like, oh yeah, like I'll build like a desktop experience. And the hardest things, I know Eric talked, my colleague Eric, he did a great job talking yesterday about like focus management. Like you control things either through voice or you through like a direct, like a remote, up, down, left, right, okay, right?
Yep.
Contra code. And so like really it's the advantage is anyone can have an experience with some of the top apps in the world on a TV. It is that 10-foot UI, like for a while was only for these top media brands, and now suddenly a lot of mobile devs are asking themselves, how do we do our implementation of that? And so it's a huge need right now for more libraries like React Space Navigation from BAM, like different areas to have that. It's just a different way you're building. Home screen, playback, all that.
Right. I'm gonna stay on you for a little bit here. Sorry.
Let's go.
We have a fair amount of time, so I'm going to be digging in a little deeper on some of this stuff. When you mentioned third-party libraries and support for TV, and a lot of times, I mean, potentially there are some situations where it's like something built for like the underlying native platform of whatever platform you're talking about. But in this case, what you're a lot of times saying is there's something for React Native, iOS, and Android that you'd love to have on TV that would work on TV. And so there needs to be some work done to make that work. If it's UI, it needs to be kind of thought through a TV perspective. Potentially there's some work needed to port. So how can us as the community kind of like move the ball forward on that, toward more TV support?
For sure. So I guess I should step back and make clear, like, if you're going to build an app for, honestly, many of the different, like, Android TV, Fire OS for Amazon, it's a fork of Android open source project. So a lot of times what we'll tell top partners or 3P developers is, like, take the existing Android bundle you've already built, sideload it, set your Amazon device or into developer mode, and just, like, push it through Android Studio or Expo to see how it works, right? So we've published a couple sample guides yesterday. You get started through Expo, you get it running, cool. I think the biggest challenge that comes right now is all these different media brands need, like an essential library would be like Lottie. So like when you turn on Netflix or any of those brands, you see that like da-doon, like that logo.
Yeah.
That's essential because stuff's loading in the background, right? So it is intentionally a logo you see, a splash screen, so that all these different assets can render by the time you perceive that you can move things around. And so like Lottie, React Navigation, Reanimated, like all these libraries are so essential. And it's that tricky thing of like, okay, if you're a maintainer of that library, one, why is this worth my time? TV, like I think it's fair that a lot of mobile devs are like, TV is so random, why would I build for TVs? There's 200 million TVs out there,
right,
all with in-app purchasing, card on file, literally will buy your stuff. Mm-hmm. And so like if it's a good use case for your business, like it's not as hard as you think, but for sure what we're actively thinking about is, I know you've probably seen like our QR codes around this event. We're actively considering kicking off a first cohort of open source sponsorship. So if you have a React Native library, if you're a core contributor or a maintainer of that, we'd love to chat. So definitely fill that thing out. And we're also actively working on having a list on reactnative.directory of libraries that will work with, at least for Fire OS. Mm-hmm. But I'll say I think it's not just like it's a lot bigger than Amazon devices. Like if you're building for LG, mm-hmm. WebOS, if you're building for tvOS, like this is in Microsoft, like these out-of-tree platforms, it's like I think a lot of these contributors don't understand like how important it is that these work, and we're all actively trying to figure out how we support that. It's a huge topic right now. We're trying to figure out.
That sponsorship for those package maintainers is huge. Like I have not seen another company do that for the React Native ecosystem.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it absolutely is. And it just keeps reinforcing that React Native can be this common skill set that we can all have, but it opens up so much more power at our fingertips. And so I'm going to go to Kira for a second here. Sorry. My wife's name is Kyra, so it's hard. And she's also here, so hi. I did want to shift gears for just a second into what Microsoft is working on. Of course, for those of you who may not know, maybe weren't in the talk or whatever, Microsoft maintains React Native Windows, which is not surprising, and React Native macOS, which may be. So they are maintaining both of those desktop frameworks. And so question to you, I'm really curious about the progress that has been made and the effort that is being put toward the new architecture adoption, which of course has been going at Meta for a while, but also Microsoft.
Yeah, absolutely. So working on the new architecture is definitely our main focus right now. And we have not released like a beta or an experimental version yet. It's all still in the progress. But we're really excited about it. Like one of the big areas that I've been working in especially is accessibility and making sure that the new architecture is on parity and has parity with where we were on paper. But we don't have any, announcements yet, but we're really excited for developers to get to try the new architecture on Windows soon.
Why would you say, I think I know the answer, but why would you say the new architecture compatibility is important for Microsoft on things like React Native Windows?
Sorry, say it again?
Why would you say that the new architecture, like moving to the new architecture, is also important for Windows, not just like iOS and Android?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like the presentation earlier today really touched on it as well. There is the one aspect of we really care about staying in line with where Meta's progress is in React Native. Microsoft has bet on this platform and plans to continue to bet on the platform. And so we want to make sure that we're staying in line with all of the new kind of like great changes that are coming in. I think on the other side, there's a lot of, great opportunities that come with the new platform, including performance benefits. I think it's also an opportunity for us to take a step back and assess how we're implementing like UI components and what makes sense for us going forward. Yeah, lots of good things.
Yeah, totally. So Eli, I want to talk about the React Native Frameworks document. What do you call it? It's a document. I don't know, RFC. Proposal, RFC, but it's kind of been accepted, so I don't know. But first off, can you explain what that is for those who don't know? And secondly, how do you see that sort of like helping to refine your relationship with the others on the stage?
Yeah. So the frameworks RFC is pretty much saying that over time, if you've been using React Native and you have not been using a framework, you are creating your own framework. And Expo being an example of a framework. Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, we surely have all of our own frameworks internally of how do we recommend people do navigation and how do people do network calls and styling and how are upgrades handled for the company. Like there's all of these questions. Like we've had to build a ton of tooling and frameworks and stuff within our companies, and I'm sure some of you within your companies as well. And we generally think that that's not really where we want people to spend their time if it's not differentiated. Like that. If that isn't helping you achieve your business goals, but that's just like a tax of using React Native, we don't want you to have to pay that tax. But it's also not the responsibility of the like React Native NPM package itself to do that. We really want that to be lean. We want that to really have the core fundamental things that enable React Native to power TV and desktop and mobile and VR and all of this kind of stuff. And so the recommendation is that you should create new applications using a framework. The only currently public external framework is Expo, and we think Expo is a fantastic choice that everyone should be just creating their apps with Expo. Expo, the framework is also separate from Expo App Services. Using Expo, the framework, does not mean that you are tied into Expo App Services, although Expo App Services are good too. We think that's going to just be a better experience for people creating apps, creating modules, upgrading. Your life will be much happier.
Yeah, and I want to go to you, Keith, for the Expo stuff.
Fans of the Expo framework.
With the React Native Framework document, I want to know how Expo has approached it internally and how they think about it. I know that for a long time it was sort of like, I remember a very long time ago, Expo was recommended, or maybe not recommended, but it was like it was a part of the React Native documentation. But the relationship was always just a little bit like not quite defined, I guess. So how do you at Expo kind of look at it now with that more formalized, I guess? And what do you see yourself doing, in that vein as you go forward?
Yeah, it's the clarity is probably the number one thing. It completely changes, not completely changes, like a lot of folks already knew about Expo and how we relate to React Native, but especially if you're not introduced to it, it changes significantly that introductory conversation, that shared stewardship of the ecosystem is a great benefit in so many ways, but it could cause a perception issue if you don't clarify some things. Like if you walk in this room and you start hearing about people who want to make React Native apps, but start with Expo, and you don't know any context, and there's no context around that, you think like, well, is like Expo this rogue thing that's shipping, competing with React? It fueled all those Expo versus React Native, copy pasta, engagement baiting posts, which are now really easy to answer. Those get downvoted right away. So we get this one really simple word to explain what we are, how we relate to React Native, and now folks who are kind of had maybe it's great for new people, but it's great for folks who have maybe entrenched. Maybe I started my app in 2015 and it was just React Native, and I built. You end up realizing, I didn't just not use Expo, I built my own framework along the way, and now you start to look at the other pre-built framework and think, what can I take from that? And then we fortunately have really good conversations about what it means to adopt Expo piece by piece. If you have the Expo package in your app, you are an Expo app. And it doesn't mean you have to do everything on day one, but now you have access to the modules API, or the Expo SDK. You can have glide paths to dev clients and updates and all the other stuff that's great in there.
Yeah, we started, actually Infinite Red started October of 2015, and React Native for Android was released the month prior. That's when it came out, and iOS was already out. By the way, does anybody know the version of React Native that would have been in October of 2015? Does anybody know that? Not you red shirts, you know.
I knew this a month ago. 13?
Not 13, Frank. And you were there, you should know.
I was 13 or 18, I couldn't remember.
Yeah. He was very close. I was just being mean to him. It was version 0.11. So yeah, you can imagine all of the bumps along the way. We're at 74 now, right? Soon to be 0.100, right?
Can I actually add on to the Expo answer?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Eli. I do have a follow-up.
An unintended, maybe unexpected, but hopefully intended side effect of this change with frameworks and recommending people start new apps with Expo is one of the things that at Meta, we really focus on the framework, on the core fundamentals. And a question that we get asked all the time is how can React Native possibly ship without this solution to this common problem that all React Native apps have? And for years, we've kind of been that's not React Native, use the third-party library. And so that's part of the if you're not using a framework, you're creating a framework, you're collecting all the different libraries to do that. And Expo has both a ton of your own libraries for those common things. So they are addressing that need that you all have, but they're also really helping us validate that React Native works for those and that they don't break. So because now shipping a version of React Native is not just a thing that we do with the NPM package. It means we need to work with Expo to make sure that it goes out into an SDK and meets their criteria for what is a valid SDK, which means that it works with all the popular libraries and that people can migrate to it. And so it's giving us a level of validation that we've never had before. And that is really, I think, what a lot of you are after for React Native, which is stability, which is one of the main things that everybody wants from a 1.0. And so this is actually giving you a lot of those benefits without actually needing to make all the other changes required to also get to 1.0.
I got chills thinking you're about to announce 1.0. Wait, what?
Some year.
Some year. Yeah, and in a way, it's an increased responsibility to make sure that you have that collaboration, but is it also a relief? Like you don't have to cover those use cases, those things?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like Expo is in many ways on the front lines of a lot of the conversations with customers, much more than we ever are.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a relief over here too, I was going to say,
Go
on
ahead.
the Expo side, because you guys are able to have like more precise focus on what you focus on within the React Native core package. We would get that feedback about, hey, this doesn't work, and sometimes we have to say, well, that's a React Native thing, that's an Expo thing. We have this back and forth where we can kind of put things in the right buckets, and we can focus on the SDK, and be very confident we're going to be shipping good versions of those core components.
Meta has historically been very good at big framework fundamental step change improvements, whether that's the new architecture or Hermes or static Hermes or all sorts of these kind of things. But we have historically been very bad at paper cuts. You have some small issue that is really affecting you, and like it's really hard for us to prioritize that and like slow down one of these big projects. Yeah. Expo is fantastic at paper cuts.
Yes.
And so that group, like this group together, is a very exciting time for everybody to be React Native devs.
Expo is very good at fixing paper cuts, right? Like not adding them, right? Yeah, okay.
I just recovered. It was pretty bad here.
Back to you, Keith, for a second. You had mentioned gradually adopting Expo. How do you do that? Like people think you choose Expo or you don't, but that's not totally the case. And what do they even mean when they say that?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, if you have Expo in your package.json, you're an Expo app. And getting that package in with a few small changes. Last year with my Not Your Grandparents Expo talk at Chain React 2023.
Who came up with the title of that? I don't remember.
Oh, yeah. So this is really funny. So Jamon and Brent and I, we were brainstorming, like, what would Expo talk about there? And I threw out a few things. And then Jamon was like, you should really do, like, this is Not Your Grandparents Expo. And but in the end, they said, but don't call it that. So then we went and worked on the talk, and then we called it that. But he forgot, so he thought it was original.
Yeah, I was like, well, that's a really good title. Like, and he's like, you gave me the idea. Okay, anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, yeah,
Yes.
where was I? So in that talk, I actually went through I started with React Native in it. And okay, here's an app with no Expo in it. And I went through and I made a PR for each level of Expo I was adding. So you start with adding the Expo package and adding the Expo module support, as we call it. So this is like a very light touch. Like the PR for that was like touching 3 or 4 files. Like you change like one little thing in like app delegate and main activity or something like that. And now you have support for all the Expo SDK. You have support for building your own modules with Swift and Cotton via the Expo Modules API. And now you can start adding those other Expo capabilities that we all kind of are very familiar with by Expo SDK packages. So I often tell people okay, add the module support, now go for dev client. So add the capability for development builds to have that app launcher interface where you can run different, your local JavaScript bundle in your local development environment, or you can run EAS update bundles in QA for much faster testing. You don't have to rebuild your app as often. That's just adding a package, and then that automatically works when you build in debug mode. That is now a dev client. And then from there, you can add Expo updates. So now you're able to do EAS update. You could do it just for QA purposes to make it faster for testing. Maybe it's really ideal to have that capability in production, so you can go for that as well. A lot of folks, when they think about, to adopt Expo, I have to adopt all the things, and they first think about, we used to call it manage versus bear. They think about, okay, I need to get rid of my iOS and Android folders and switch that to those being what we now call continuous native generation, which is to have those be ephemeral things that get generated just in time for build. That's it's amazing when you get there. But I would say if you have an existing project that already has native customizations, that's probably your last step. Because that doesn't really affect you until at the minimum you're at the next React Native upgrade. Because you could just leave that stuff in place, get all the other features up front, and then work on your migration to CNG.
So I want to go back to you, Chiara. You had mentioned earlier about the accessibility side of things and the Be My Eyes application in particular, which I don't think is a Microsoft app, right? Like it's a third party. Can you talk more about that? We had talked earlier backstage about how that was brought to Windows and like how that kind of unlocked the door to many, many users on a new platform.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the beginning of the year, we were approached by the Be My Eyes team, which is a company that originally created a mobile application that was meant for connecting blind or low vision users with sighted volunteers who could help identify objects or products within a photo. And so the Be My Eyes team was actually looking at creating a desktop experience that leveraged AI, and they wanted to see if they could create a version of the app in which their users could capture, either content on their screen or content from their camera, and the AI would be able to say, "Hey, like you're centered within your camera for a video call, or this is the object that you're showing me in front of the camera." And they were looking to ship this experience really quickly, and they had come to our team because they were really interested in React Native. I think the devs had some React web experience before, and so they actually spent the first week just as like a hackathon experiment to see would React Native for desktop work for them, and they were able to spin up a pretty great prototype by the end of the week, having never tried React Native or React Native for desktop before. And so that was really exciting, and they were able to ship their product in May, which is now available in the Microsoft Store if people want to check it out. But I think for us as a platform, it was also really interesting to get to work with a product that was explicitly in the accessibility space. Like I mentioned earlier, like accessibility has been one of the areas that I've focused in my work as a platform maintainer, and I think getting to partner with an accessibility product was a really great piece of additional feedback on, do we as a platform have strong accessibility infrastructure so that applications can be built that are, usable and available for all users.
We're working on two React Native Windows applications at Infinite Red. One of them's for a client, one's an internal app. And I think one of the things that's really cool about the accessibility side of that is that every platform seems to have its own approach to accessibility, and they seem to have way different APIs, and so it's already something to learn, like something additional to learn, but now you have to learn it for every single platform you're going down the line. And with React Native, it can be a common meeting point for something that, honestly, I know that there will be differences maybe between TV and a phone, but in terms of the APIs, really should be unified. And so I think it's really cool that React Native is a place that most of the big companies have kind of said, okay, we'll meet here. We'll decide on what makes sense for accessibility here. And it enables people to deploy accessible apps across the spectrum without having to learn even more stuff like APIs and whatnot, and even just approaches.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out. I know even for myself, as I was ramping up into the accessibility space, there's a lot of APIs out there, and there's also a lot of information to learn on, exactly what is needed in terms of getting accessibility support and all of those, different bits and pieces. And so I think it has been really interesting in working in the React Native space that you have all of these platforms coming together to say, hey, what's the sort of core set of APIs that we can use? And then we have sort of the native experts who've gone out and worked on the specific bits that are needed for each platform. And I know earlier in the conference, I was having a conversation with some developers even about the difference in the APIs between React Native and React, and how even those API sets target different things in relation to accessibility. And so I think it's definitely a space that we'll continue to iterate on and continue to find convergence, but it's great to have that layer of abstraction for people who haven't had the time to really build specific expertise in that space.
Yep.
a couple years ago, Meta took a pledge for Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and to improve the accessibility quality of React Native. And we had the accessibility team at Meta do a bunch of audits over React Native and a bunch of the API surface, and we improved a lot of issues and like added APIs for accessibility to help people be able to build whatever accessible UIs they needed. And I think just last year there's some new regulation coming out in Europe, I think, that's going to put a lot more pressure on this for more people. At least for Meta, it will.
Yeah. So, Chris, I have a question for you.
About European regulation, I can't. Next.
Okay, Keith. This is, I'm sure everybody has a take on this, but I want to start with you. The developer, so I have to set this up a little bit. So when we're working with clients, often, or I shouldn't say often, but you know, at times we are brought in to do like proof of concept work for React Native. Is this a valid direction to go? And they have a web team, they have a native iOS team, and they have a native Android team. And when we do that, there's sometimes resistance, usually not from the web developers. They usually see it as like an extension of their skills. But potentially from Android, and most often from iOS, because, you know, I was an iOS developer, and I'm quite stubborn too. From your standpoint, as an individual developer, this is kind of a softball, but do you think React Native is worth learning?
I think so. I think your setup is really important, because for 10 years we only catered to Java and Android developers. Basically, the message was, if you already are an Android, guess what? You can come to Amazon App Store too. And what we've noticed as like by developer demand is why we're even here at React Native, because a surprisingly large amount of apps in our App Store are built with React Native, and we didn't know that. Like, they were figuring out how to make it work. And so based on that feedback, that's why we now are building guides. And so to your point, for existing, this is like a loaded thing, but existing senior Android developers, many of them, from my experience, viscerally hate the concept of React Native. It pisses them off, especially if you're committed to building native, purist things. And I do think Turbo Modules has helped, but I also think like the job here is not to win over hearts and minds of existing Android devs who are a team that's dedicated to building Android specific. But I think if you are a business that, if you're a company or a startup that has dreams eventually of going public or getting new rounds of funding, like, you're gonna keep going into new lines of business. Often it'll start in a web app or it'll start in mobile. Why would you want to? I just think like I was early Evernote. I saw what happened when you have an independent Android, iOS, web, and Windows team. They don't talk to each other. They didn't work as one team. And just it's not necessarily React Native, but just the art of like, we're gonna build an app and then we're gonna make decisions there's gonna be some platform specific decisions we need to make, but just that act has gone from like, we build in silos, we ship our org chart, or are we shipping an experience? And I do think it's, what I'm speaking to is like the culture war down to like, no, we're here to release. And so, I think for sure, no question React. Like when folks come to me, like, and I mentor folks, like, how do I get started? I usually am routing them towards a React.gg or like get started with JavaScript, Free Code Camp, React. But certainly many React devs come to me and go, hey, like, I know eventually I'm gonna have to learn React Native once my company goes to this stage. And so that's where I think React Native comes in, is like, when your business is ready to go, like, this is a platform you're gonna get comfortable with and jump into. That's my experience, at least.
Yeah, no, totally valid points. And from my perspective, native developers, so web developers, in my opinion, web developers bring the developer experience expectations to React Native, because they get there and they're like Xcode, and they're like, what is this, and why why is it crashing, and why is it so huge, and things like, why can't I use Vim? These are the things that, however, native developers also bring something to the table. And I would say, and I did web for many years too, so I'm in kind of both camps here, probably the worst of both, sorry. But the native developers bring an expectation of the user experience, the polish, the performance. And a lot of times, when we get feedback from people who criticize React Native, it's often around, this feels janky, this feels not native, right? And unfortunately, it's often web developers who maybe don't always have that as the primary goal. So the meeting of the two together with React Native, the quality expectations go up, and so do the developer experience expectations. I would say that as a native developer, native developers coming to React Native are absolutely critical for our community. And I encourage them, learn it. Yeah, you can always get a Swift job if you want, but knowing React Native is just going to be more and more, it just gives you more and more options as time goes on. And honestly, the native developers who come to Infinite Red end up using that native knowledge a lot. It happens all the time. So that would be my take.
Well, I think what you're getting to too is even when we're talking about Eli's background, there's no 20-year experience React Native developer. That doesn't exist.
Yeah, not with that attitude.
And I think what I've noticed is not yet. What a lot of you have in common is I don't think you can be a React Native developer without having a mindset of being a lifelong learner. It's kind of humbling when you're a very smart person who's paid money to do a thing and you realize you don't know what you're talking about when it comes to React Native. How many times I've had a senior Android dev and I'm talking about components. They're like, yeah, I know what components are. I know what Java components are. I'm like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. And I do think there's a humbling aspect of we're all literally learning the latest in the latest releases, and we're here to have to figure out how to deliver a great experience. And so I think just the nature of React Native, you can't come in here and be a know-it-all. You have to be open, and then things change, and then paradigms change, and that's why I obviously love that. I'm a developer advocate. That's what brings me here. But I do think,
I've always gotten bored with the technology in 5 years, but I'm here 9 years and still loving it, and it's because of that variety. Eli, I want to.
The differences between React Native and those other technologies that you get bored of after 5 years?
What's the difference?
They're at 1.0. You set me up real good for
I
that.
totally did, yeah. I want to ask you the same career question, where do you think it's worth it for a native developer to learn React Native from your perspective?
I mean, one of the things I found really pretty cool about this event and the sponsors that you have is all of the different places that if you're a React developer, you can build for. Web, obviously, iOS and Android, obviously, Mac and Windows, TVs, tablets, e-inks, but only if you're an Amazon employee. AVP from CallStack.
Right.
We build a lot of our UI, all the 2D UI that you really see in Quest that we've been demoing here, that we write with React Native internally, and you can sign up for early access to be able to do that externally. This is what it means to be in the React ecosystem. This is the power of the skill set that you've learned. You are good at creating UI. You know how to do that. You know the tools to do that. So I think it's a fantastic thing to do. One of the other things that you mentioned is the UX bar that native engineers have. And one of the things that React Native engineers and the ethos of React Native kind of pulls you into is I can build my application twice as fast. I don't need to do it on both platforms. And one of the sayings I've been feeling more recently is that the value of React Native being able to share so much code across platforms is to give you that time back to go focus on the things that need to be really custom to that platform.
Yeah.
That an app that looks the same across every platform might be the fastest way to get that app on that platform, but you're missing the user experience. You're missing really like the things that the developers, that users expect from that platform, and you have that time to go optimize that, and that is a better use of that time than having multiple entire teams that have different principles, and that's why they don't work together.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think it's on us as the React Native community to continue to push that bar forward, because we do get criticism, and it's often like, well, I tried a React Native app and it really did not feel good, you know? But we can get there. We know we can. We know that highly polished apps are possible with React Native. Kurak, I'm going to ask you about native modules on the Windows side, because I think that generally speaking, I've done this long enough that if I need to write an Android module or UI or an iOS module or UI, I can generally figure it out. But on the Windows side, are things significantly different, or are you, like, what language are you writing, just for the folks out there, what language are you writing? Does it look kind of similar to what you would do on iOS and Android?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say on average, we would use C++ for most of our community modules. Some use C#. And then structurally, I think they do operate fairly similarly to what you would see on iOS and Android. But of course, you're plugging in, Windows UI components and Windows APIs and things like that. Connecting back, I think, actually to the last question, I think one of the other interesting things that we've seen, because we have a lot of developers who work on our team or who are building React Native for Windows products, is a lot of the Windows people or the people who work at Microsoft were Windows developers. And so they had all of this knowledge in like a specific native platform. And I think the community modules is an especially interesting space when you now have both native expertise and you now know React Native. Like, it's actually a really great way to apply both of those sets of knowledge. And I think we've seen that to be true within the Windows modules, and I imagine that's also true within iOS and Android.
Yeah, I think that is probably one of the bigger challenges, is making sure that we actually have, good third-party support across the board with, all of these different platforms that we are trying to do. Now, Keith, I don't necessarily expect you to have the answer for this, but I know you'll have an answer, so I'll ask you. Expo has been shouldering probably a disproportionate amount of the responsibility for third-party libraries within our ecosystem. We were using Expo libraries since way, way before. In fact, I want the crowd to give Expo a round of applause for how much they do. Do you see Expo as like really probably more focused on kind of the footprint you already have, or do you think that Expo's kind of like future ambitions might be to hit a lot more platforms, maybe help with some of these third-party libraries, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so one thing I often think about is, so thinking back to when, you might, in your grandparents' Expo, where you might have had to use the Expo SDK package in order to access that capability at all. One thing that foundationally changed is we implemented, pre-build and the CLI foundations that go into like how EAS build works today, where it's very much, changing things into a very standard React Native app and then building it and having that support for all the packages in the ecosystem, the ability to build your own packages easily. And config plugins, of course, all those things together. One thing that made me think about is actually we reached this stage at a certain point where it was more important for us to build the fundamental tools that lets everything integrate versus building another SDK package. So in a weird little way, as the SDK, the Expo SDK got more like powerful as it actually took on fewer responsibilities because it gave people a really good way to plug in. So a really great example I like to think about is in-app purchases. So there's like certain APIs that it's not enough just to provide like a one-to-one interface from JavaScript to the native code. You really actually have like specialized knowledge in how that platform works. Like in-app purchases, it's a client thing, it's a server thing. And so like having that capability to use any native module, let people go for like, Revenue Cat's in-app purchase module, and which was a much better solution than trying to use like our basic replication of that API. So when we think about individual SDK packages now, instead of thinking about do we have the whole kitchen sink, we're thinking often about are there specific areas where we can really bring something, like move the needle forward. So Expo Image was a great example of that. We were able to pick up, address some gaps in general image support and put a really good experience there. We're making next generation AV pack, like the next generation of Expo AV is like Expo Video, a much better video support experience. So yeah, definitely we want to like pick and choose where we have expertise, where we can bring the most, and then focus on providing the general tools. So subject matter experts, like there's people who are really good at background location, and it's like probably better to use their package,
Right.
and it's compatible with that Expo app.
We're running out of time now, but I do want to thank you all for being a part of the panel, and also just sort of on behalf of the companies that you represent up here on the stage, thank you for investing in this community and the platform and all of the tools that we all use. I mean, I built a company on it, I'm very grateful. So I appreciate it very much, and those of you in the audience, feel free to, of course, reach out to them and ask any further questions, and let's give them all a big round of applause.